Hello, this is John McGuirk with Gript Media, and I want to welcome you all to this interview with Hermann Kelly of the Irish Freedom Party. Unfortunately, what you're hearing now isn't actually part of the interview. It is an apology from me. I feel bad for Hermann because what happened in this video, as we were recording it, was that on my side, the microphone that I was using switched at the start of the video to a backup microphone, which wasn't anywhere near my mouth. So what you're going to hear is me sounding like I'm in a warehouse somewhere, but thankfully, the good news is Hermann can be heard fairly clearly, and he's the person running for election, not me. So I just wanted to let you know what happened in case you're wondering about the sound, and it's an issue we won't let happen again in the future. That said, I think Hermann Kelly's answers in this interview are very interesting. I hope you find it of value as you are making up your mind how to vote on June the 7th. With that, here's the audio as originally recorded. Hello and welcome back to Gript Media. My name is John McGuirk, and this is the second in a series of interviews that I am conducting ahead of the European elections with various candidates, party leaders, people who are going to be out there seeking your votes. You may have heard on Monday we released the first of those with M2 leader Peadar Tóibín, and thanks very much, Peadar, for doing that. That was an interesting conversation, and if you're looking at this on our YouTube, it should be the one above this video if you missed that. This is number 2, and here we're going to somebody who's also running in that same constituency, Midlands Northwest. We actually have a run of Midlands Northwest people coming up. Well, he, like Peadar, is a party leader. Unlike Peadar, his party don't yet have any elected representation in the country, but he's very much hoping to change that. I present to you all Mr. Hermann Kelly of the Irish Freedom Party. Hermann, thanks a million for coming on.
Thanks for the invitation, John. Very kind of you. I appreciate it.
Look, I'm going to try and keep these interviews as standardised as possible across the Canada. Obviously, we can't ask everyone the same questions. Just a reminder of the rules. I'm going to try and be fair to everyone. So if I ask you a question, Hermann, I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to answer it. And after that, to keep the interview flowing, I might interrupt you, or I might not if you're being really interesting. And the other rule is no attacks on other candidates, please, by name or going after anyone. You're talking about yourself, not necessarily other candidates. You should obviously talk about government policy or.
I'll have to be subtle. I'll have to be subtle.
You have to be subtle. All right. Well, the first question I asked Peadar is the same one I'm going to ask you. There's 28 or 27, 26, whatever number, an enormous number of candidates running in Midlands Northwest. Somebody listening to this interview, out of those 26, 27, whatever it is, why are you the person who should get their vote above all the rest of them?
Very simple. I'm the most experienced candidate. I've worked in the European Parliament for 15 years as a press officer, as director of communications for a Eurosceptic EFDD group for 10 years or 11 years, and then as a press officer for director of communications for a Romanian conservative MEP called Christian Therese, the man who led the charge against the lockdown in 2019, 2020. I believe I know many of the people because I worked with a very well-known MEP, Nigel Farage, for over 10 years. I know personally a lot of the MEPs. I know the different groups. I know how the European Parliament works. The process of making law is difficult. It's quite complex. I know people who can do the job, and the things that I don't know how they work, and nobody can know everything. I do know people who know how it works. And so with my knowledge of the MEPs, my knowledge of the process, and I think the experience of knowing what needs to be done in Europe, because there are big systemic problems in Europe to do with this climate alarmism, mass immigration, this anti-business expensive energy drive from the EU at the moment. Europe has a lot of problems. Ireland has problems. I think I know what the problems are. I can look for solutions, and with my experience and knowledge of people, I think I can do a good job.
A lot of people know, obviously, that when you're voting for an MEP, you're not only voting for the Irish Party. So if I'm voting, as I said the other day, if I'm voting for Fianna Fáil, I'm actually voting to strengthen the group of the Alliance and Liberals and Democrats in Europe. Voting for the Labour Party, voting to strengthen the Social Democrats, whatever they're called. They're the second biggest group. Your guys are a new party. It's understandable that you have yet to align with a particular group in the European Parliament. But can you tell the voters, if they're voting for Hermann Kelly, what wing of the European Parliament are they voting to strengthen? Who will you be aligning with?
There's realistically, there's two groups which are excellent at the minute. Now, I worked for previous group, which was somewhere between Le Pen ID group, which we were not aligned with, and the ECR group, which is the socialist reformist, no, sorry, conservative group at the moment. I am currently employed by a Romanian MEP who's in the ECR group, which is the socially conservative reformist group. He's a Romanian. I also know many MEPs who are in the ID group, which is the Le Pen group. Now, personally, I'm not very on Le Pen and politics. If I had my way, yeah, I would probably be fit somewhere in between the two groups, the ECR group and the ID group. But just like Pater said the last time, and also the Christian Therese, the MEP who I currently work for, there's a lot of talk about a supergroup or an amalgamation between the ECR group and the ID group. I have not, let's say, pledged my troth to either group. I am keeping my options open, but it will certainly be one of the two groups because, as you would guess, John, I will not be joining the left group or the Greens or the ALDE group or Renew group or the Federalist Fanatics or the Socialist group. So it will be either one of the ECR group, the ID group, or an amalgamation of the two if that happens. But it will certainly be on the nationalist Eurosceptic wing of the European Parliament.
What order you would call the far right of the European Parliament is basically.
No, it's not. No, ID, an ECR group is not. That many of the groups, many of the parties within that group are actually in government or have recently been in government, be it the Poles or the Czechs or the Hungarians have left the EPP. They are now non-attached. No, they're not far right at all. They're mainstream. They're mainstream governing parties across Europe, many of them. So, and anyway, this whole thing about mainstream, extreme, hey, 79% of the population in Ireland is against more immigration. So that's the mainstream position. Doesn't matter what the mainstream media tell us.
Well, this is it. That's why I said that's what RTE would call them, not necessarily what I would call them. Just so we're clear.
Yes.
Before I get on to policy, I want one last question, which is obviously anyone in Ireland in European elections can vote for your party. You're standing in Ireland Northwest. Michael Leahy is running in Ireland South, and your Dublin candidate, his name escapes me, but it's Dermot, isn't it?
Dermot O'Connor.
Dermot O'Connor. So anyone can vote, but in terms of the local elections, which are happening on the same day, how many candidates are you running nationwide? And
I think I believe it's like at the moment. I believe on the website. I believe it's 24. But by the end of this week, we hope to have 30 candidates. There's been a very fast rush on the last number of days. I was before this interview. I was just talking about being up in Monaghan, up beside Castleblaney, meeting Farmer up there, and meeting people. We should have 30 candidates by close. We're hoping to have 30 by close of nominations on the 18th.
and what's
for the local elections.
What's a successful outcome for the IFP? Like, what's your sort of benchmark?
Successful outcome is that, to be realistic, I believe it'd be very difficult for. I believe that both myself and Michael Leahy have a very good chance of being elected. There's a large field of nationalists where I am, certainly in the Midlands Northwest. I believe our kind of socially conservative, economically liberal, nationalist, Eurosceptic line, which has been clear and consistent over the last 5 years, people will find that attractive. And in the current, let's say, political melee where immigration and housing and security are are being talked about at the doors all around the country, I believe we'll do very well. Was this success? Either both myself or Michael Leahy get elected, and we get a number of local election candidates voted in as well. And I believe we will, both in Louth and in Sligo. I believe in Westmeath as well. I believe we've very strong local candidates who know the area very well, who've worked the area very hard already. And I believe that if there's justice in this world, that they will find some reward for their efforts.
All right. Well, let's talk policy a little bit, because you talk there, you've had a very long track record of sort of Eurosceptic mainstream conservatism. But I mean, obviously the flagship policy of the Irish Freedom Party, I suppose, I don't know whether you agree with this, but it seems to me that the reason you were founded is that you are, to my knowledge, this maybe not the only one, but certainly the biggest party in the country that has as a policy leaving the European Union. And I would put it to you that is a position, whether people agree with it or not, that all the polls, and whether you believe the polls or not is obviously an open question, but the polls suggest that's sort of like a 5-6% proposition with sort of 85 to 90% of the public against it. So even if everyone who agrees with one that votes for you, it seems to me that you're not going to get elected if that were to happen. So you have to persuade people who don't agree with you on that question to vote for you. So why shouldn't they be concerned? Why shouldn't they look at sort of what happened to the UK with Brexit, Hermann, and say, well, I'm not sure I want that to happen here?
Well, the polls, like polls done by the European movement, is like asking the kind of McDonald's, like McDonald's doing polls on burger quality. But actually, even there, the latest polls is actually 84% are like the Ireland, yes, is in European terms one of the most pro-EU countries in Europe, but even within Ireland itself, it's now fallen to 84% approval rating for the European Union. And anyway, the policy of leaving the EU, which we have, and I may put it in positive terms about being a democratic, self-governing country where we determine our own laws, budgets, and borders, maintain our own military neutrality. To have all those things, that's incompatible with EU membership. But it's actually it's not primary, but it is the long-term goal of the party, because we believe it's dishonest to say to people we want to decide our own trade policy, we want to be masters of our own house and make that we have a national democracy, a functioning national democracy, where Irish people alone make our own laws for our own benefit, and we decide our budgets, and we decide our borders, and we decide our trade policies. It's been respectful and being honest with the electorate by saying we can only do these things while we are no longer members of the European Union. And like, for example, anyway, the whole polls is we have an argument, what is best for Ireland at the minute. Now, we are incredibly, we have an Irish government which is signing up to EU migration laws, not because we need to, the side of the EU migration pact. We don't need to sign up this. Is it the mentality of the predominant political mentality in the country is they want to be the best boys in Europe. They want a pat in the head. We want to turn that around completely and say that those who exercise political power in Ireland must be voted by the Irish people, and they must be accountable to the Irish people, and they shouldn't act as messenger boys for the people in Brussels who we didn't elect and who we can't get rid of. All we are looking for is to be a normal, democratic country which exercises its powers for the benefit of its own people. And being honest about it.
I'll give you 90 seconds there. I'm going to interject with a question just to keep the conversation going, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Which is this. What do you say to somebody who says, maybe somebody listening to this program who's inclined to, agrees with you on a lot of what you're saying, but says to themselves, yeah, I agree with what he's saying in principle, we should have more control over our own laws and all the rest of it, but the cost of doing what he's saying is so high in terms of the currency. We'd have to get rid of the euro, bring back the punt with all the instability and risk that poses. Let me finish the question, because there's another part. And then obviously the signals in inverted commas that might be sent to international business here and all the rest of it. What do you say to those people about the potential costs of leaving the EU?
Well, the potential costs, I don't believe we can afford the EU anymore. It's a club to which we're a net contributor for the last 10 years. The last time we have the official figures, 2021, we're a net contributor to the EU budget of 1.1 billion. Since we joined the EU, they've taken 200, according to Eurostat and Karen Devine and DCU, EU boats have taken 215 billions worth of fish or wealth out of Irish waters. That there was the EU when we were down on our luck, 2000 2013. The EU kicked us when we were on the ground. It was the EU and the IMF, the Troika, which imposed 64 billion bank debt on the Irish taxpayer. Now, given that we've only received 44 billion euro cash, and that's the official figures from the Irish government, that's all we've received. Like, in net terms, we're a massive loser. And in regards trade, and remember, the trade is a sole competence of the European Union. In trade, we sell 32% of our exports to the United States of America. We're not in a political union with the United States. We don't have open borders and free movement with the US. We don't have, our Supreme Court is not in Washington. And yet we only sell 38% of our goods to the EU, and yet we're in a political union where we make a massive contribution every year, and our Supreme Court is basically the European Court of Justice. And we have one vote. We have one vote out of 27. I don't think it's a very good deal. And I think long term, when we considered, it's certainly not the sovereign, independent Ireland that men and women of 1916 joined. And I think in global terms, where there could be a good argument made 50 years ago, yet we joined the European Union, they give us a lot of money. Trade tariffs in general have fallen from 15 to 3% across the world. And the whole thing of both in demographically and economically, Europe is becoming a bit of a dead duck, because the future is actually in Asia, and we should really think about trading globally rather than tying ourselves to this dying culturally and demographically limping along Europe at the moment,
All right. Well, we'll park that issue because and I think I've given you a fair chance to make your case on there. I'm going to ask you now a couple of sort of quick fire questions. You're elected to the European Union, to the European Parliament as an MEP next year, in June. Next year, I think we both would agree that whatever happens, Ireland will still be in the EU and you'll still be in the job. Let's say another European Parliament proposal for aid to Ukraine comes up. I think it was 50 billion was the most recent one. Let's say next year there's another proposal for weapons to Ukraine to stem off the Russian invasion. The Ukrainians say, if we don't get these weapons, Russia will win the war. And there's a yes/no vote. Which way are you voting?
I believe Russia already has won the war. The conflict in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, just as the conflict between Palestine and Israel, I don't believe is really, we shouldn't get involved in these conflicts, either financially or militarily. We should keep out of these conflicts. We should use that Ireland historically, actually, because it formerly was a military neutral country, was able to be a peacemaker and an honest peace broker. And I believe we should return to that role, and we should withdraw from EU battle groups, participation in PESCO, in this anti-chamber to NATO, which is Partnership for Peace. We should take back meaningful military neutrality and go back to a role of being an honest broker of peace across the world. And I believe, as a small country, which we would have pretty small army and military capability anyway, I think we would have a much better impact on the world than we are at the minute. We're just a little plaything for the big guys, basically. And so to answer the question directly, no, I don't believe that Ireland should be given a bucket load of money or weapons or soldiers to participate in anything to do with Ukraine or Russia.
I'll ask you a follow-on question on that, because I think it's an interesting one. Let's say that you're right and Russia's already won the war, and Russia eventually wins that war and ends up seizing a bunch of territory in Ukraine, however much that might be. Ukrainian refugees who are currently in Ireland, who originate from the parts of Ukraine that was subsequently occupied by Russia after the war, should they have to go back to Russia, as it would then be?
Well, the eastern part of Ukraine is already under Russian control, has been since pretty much 2014. Well, after 2014. In general, talking in general, those conflicts, they are the priority of an Irish government, priority of myself as an MEP over there representing the people of Ireland, should be what is best for the people of Ireland. I don't want to get involved. I don't want the Irish government. I don't want the Irish state. I don't want the Irish people involved in the military conflicts of other nations. We should stay out and we should help and get these people talking to go towards peace rather than conflict, and we should stay out of it as a general principle. Now, I'm very sorry for all these people in Ukraine, just as I was sorry for the Russian speakers who were bombed on the ground after 2014. But ultimately, these conflicts are not my priority, and ultimately, they're not my business.
I would say on sort of the topic of immigration in general, because obviously immigration in Ireland has sort of three components, one of which I think you guys have a sort of unique position on, but the three components are obviously European Union free movement, where you've got people coming from perfectly legally coming from places like France, Slovenia, any EU member state can come here and live here. Then you've got obviously the Ukrainian situation, and then finally you've got what's called international protection, which are basically people coming from the rest of the world. The one thing that Ireland, I think everyone would agree at the moment, legally has no say over at all, is free movement of people within the European Union. Is that something that you would like to, you guys would like to restrict, change in any way? I assume it is because you want to leave the European Union. But do you guys have a unique view on that?
Yeah, if we look at the PPS numbers, now, the press wanted us always talking about immigration in terms of refugees from Ukraine or asylum seekers from Afghanistan, etc. But actually, the real big driver, and every year, work permits, there's roughly 40,000 a year, 40,000 work permits. Half of them go to Indians, pretty well educated in Indians as well, every year. But the vast majority of people coming in every year into Ireland, they come in completely legally through EU open borders and free movement. And yes, we believe that people like Joseph Puska, the Slovak Roma who murdered Aisling Murphy, if he hadn't been allowed in the country, Aisling Murphy would be alive today. There was a case down in Wexford there, actually at the same time as the murder of Aisling Murphy. A guy of 54 came, another Slovak, I'm not sure if it was a Roma, he basically raped a girl, sexually assaulted this girl. It was up in court, and I found out that he had just walked into Ireland and he had actually murdered someone in Slovakia before he came here. So open borders of all these unvetted people. Basically, we cannot take the numbers. We can't afford it anymore. And Ireland, we need to make Ireland safer again. And we can only do that when we control the numbers and the qualifications and be able to find out that the people coming in here, they've got something to contribute, and certainly that they don't have a criminal record and they're not going to be like a drain on our financial resources. And yes, I believe long term, we can only be a self-governing, independent, sovereign country, making laws for the benefit of Irish people when we're independent and no longer as a member of the European Union. But that's a long-term goal. That could take 25, 30 years. But it's a long-term goal.
Yeah, and no one's pretending, in fairness, that you're going to be implementing these policies tomorrow. But I want to get some sense of kind of like where you'd like to go. So,
the problem on immigration, as you pointed, well, as we're discussing here, is that for ourselves, it has as much to do with completely legal EU migration as it has to people coming, getting a plane and coming from Afghanistan, from France into Ireland, etc.
Yeah, but my follow-on question is this, because I think Matt Tracy on Gript in recent weeks has written that I think something like 20% of the Irish population, maybe more like 17%,
22%,
were born outside the country. Yeah. It depends. Yeah. It depends. There's all sorts of. It's around about a fifth people born.
Yes.
So, like, if you were ever to get into power and you were to enact most of your policy and all the rest of it, somebody who was, say, moved here in 2004 from Latvia and Lithuania, Eastern Europe, has kids here, born in Ireland and all the rest of it. What is your view on that? Is there an amnesty that you give to those people and say the policy changes going forward, or do you start telling people who've maybe lived here for 20 years that they have to, and came here perfectly legally, that they have to go home?
Yeah, I believe retroactivity in law is very dangerous. That people come in, if people come in legally, they should be able to remain legally. However, as someone mentioned it to me today, actually, but there has been a lot of citizenship certificates given out to a lot of people who've got no connection to Ireland. They've come in. Sure, look at Helen McEntee there. She's given an amnesty. She's given out Irish citizenships to 17,000 people who have come into Ireland illegally, remained illegally, and she actually, as Justice Minister, has rewarded these people with an amnesty and a pathway to citizenship. I believe that's one, it's reckless, it's dangerous to the security of a country, and three, it should not happen. And our policy would be that if you're here legally, you can remain, but if you came in into Ireland illegally, or you made a bogus claim, and even if you got a certificate based on bogus claims, I think ultimately, long term, we have to examine that. And if you came here illegally and made a bogus claim, Ireland's not the place for you. We wish you all the best elsewhere. But actually, long term, yeah, we want to, like, it's a very simple policy we have in immigration. It's not people's desire from anywhere around the world to come here. It's what is beneficial for Ireland and the people of Ireland. That should be the basis of immigration policy for Ireland.
Let's talk about the economy and business and all the rest of it. And obviously in Midlands Northwest, farming, unlike Dublin, for example, farming is an issue. Farming is a massive issue in Midlands Northwest.
Yeah.
What can you do as an MEP, or what would you be seeking to do as an MEP? What legislation would you be proposing or opposing that's maybe going through now, or proposing that isn't going through, that would help out farmers in Midlands Northwest where you're elected?
Yeah, well, I was at the IFA hustings there in Mullingar. I think it was on Tuesday, Wednesday. And basically they raised the farmers put their stall, IFA representatives put their stall out, and we responded very, very professionally. And one, that I will oppose EU expansion because, one, we won't be able to afford it, into the Western Balkans, into the Ukraine. You're talking, like, especially with the population of the Ukraine, it would be a huge increase in population. The cap budget, if the cap budget has to be shared among twice as many farmers as is present, obviously EU expansion would make a huge drop in income for Irish farmers. So, one, we would oppose EU expansion. Two, we would oppose EU Mercosur deal. Basically, that's good for German car manufacturers who want to sell their goods in Brazil, but for Ireland, it would mean that 99,000 tons of Brazilian beef would be coming into the European market. That the money that farmers would be getting for their grass-fed beef would be their incomes would be decimated. So we will oppose that EU Mercosur deal. Basically, I stated very clearly that we reject on principle this climate alarmism, this irrational, this phobia of carbon dioxide. We believe that carbon dioxide is good. It's necessary for photosynthesis. We reject this climate hysteria. And so we would also, for example, oppose the EU so-called nature restoration law, which is pretty much an EU land grab. And we believe that with a world population going up, the food production and food security is very important, and now is not the time to put good arable land into abeyance, and it's certainly not for the European Union to dictate to Irish state or Irish farmers that they have to put land into abeyance. And it is actually terrible that in December 2023, every Irish MEP voted in favour of the nature restoration law, which is pretty much to make arable land, put it into abeyance and flood it.
I came across a case in actually the border counties in the area where you're running recently enough, where somebody died and their land was sold, and that the land had basically been let go to seed. Right, there were whin bushes or furze bushes, as we call, growing through it. Trees had sprouted up, all the rest of it. The guy hadn't farmed in 20 years, and nature had taken back over, basically. Anyway, local farmer bought in the bulldozers, leveled the place, leveled the trees, leveled the bushes. Should farmers have the right to do that? I mean, don't the kind of the crusties have a point there when they say, look, the way we've done dairy in this country has encouraged people to absolutely flatten any little bit of biodiversity we have at all. I mean, you in favour of any restrictions at all on that kind of thing?
No, it's yeah, I see where you're going. We oppose this irrational fear of carbon dioxide because, as even NASA has shown over the last 35 years, the increase we are at historically pretty much low levels of carbon dioxide, like compared to throughout the millennia. The climate has always changed. The climate will always change. The temperature has been much higher and much lower. Carbon dioxide levels have been much higher, but not much lower than they are now. So carbon dioxide increased levels have actually greened the planet in the last 35 years. But we are opposed to this climate alarmism. However, we also believe in a clean and green Ireland. We acknowledge that there's a huge problem of loss of biodiversity and habitat. And like, for example, fly life across Europe has fallen by 50% in the last 70 years. So with the whole thing of pesticides and loss of habitat, these things we would be opposed, for example, like single-use plastics. Like, why is that? Is that a good idea? Pollution, phosphate, too much phosphates and nitrates in the water course. It's not good long term. So we would be in favour of a very ecological Ireland, but we just don't agree with the climate alarmism. And we, like, for example, we would be opposed to the carbon tax because it makes our milk and our meat more expensive. It makes it more difficult for young people to drive to work in their cars. It makes it more expensive for old people to heat their homes. And so we're opposed to the carbon tax, carbon hysteria, but we do want a clean and green Ireland. And for example, the book I'm reading at the minute is, I forget the author, is down in Kerry, but it's basically about a wild Atlantic rainforest, about planting, like, because the top of the mountains, really, they're bald, but if you kind of fence them off from, like, a lot of it, as you know, and I presume Monaghan's the same as Donegal, a lot of commonage. If these areas were fenced off to keep sheep and deer off, even for like 10 years, but in no time, you'd have oak and beech forests on the top of the mountains again. I think something that is good for biodiversity in Ireland. It's good for our environment. And to see the rebirth of deciduous native forests in Ireland was something that I believe it would be very good for our country.
Okay, we're kind of heading towards as much time as we have, but I want to talk about some issues that aren't sort of immigration, agriculture. So, like, health is obviously an area that it's actually, in fairness, it's the number one issue on your website in terms of policy. You say you want to.
So what did you say it was?
Health.
Health.
You want your policy.
I would kind of actually say energy. That the cheaper energy policy we have impacts not only people in their home or heating their home, but also businesses as well. Because energy costs in Ireland are very high in European terms, and yet here we're shutting down peat-powered power plants in the Midlands, and we're importing wood pellets from Brazil. It's I believe this is madness. What we should be doing is reopening gas and oil exploration off our coast, and long term also looking at the cost effectiveness, the safety profile of both tidal power and nuclear power in Ireland, because our energy costs are too high, and we really need to get a hold on that to reduce energy costs, to help business, and also reduce the cost of living for ordinary people. And also data centres. By the end of this decade, 29% of all energy produced in Ireland will go in data centres. I believe we've more than done our part, and we need to, for example, we would push to stop in a national level, stop all new plan permission for new data centres. I believe we have more than done our part for data centres.
Okay, I want to. I would ask you, because the data centers thing is interesting, but I don't want to take up loads of time once sort of then ethereal point. There's two
Sure.
questions I did want to ask you. One is about crime and the military. And your tackling serious crime policy has, you want to reopen guard stations in rural areas, you want tougher sentencing, you want to double the cab budget, you want to increase the size of the emergency response unit. The one that caught my eye, though, was army patrols in the most sensitive areas. Should the army ever be using it? But like that's not something you see from a lot of political parties. Is that, like, what would you say to somebody who sees that and says, well, look, the army's not a police force and we don't want to see the army?
The army isn't the police force. I think that was referring to, you may remember, a number of years ago in Limerick, where drug gangs had taken over, various parts of the country, and where the guards were couldn't go into. That would be extremely unusual. No, the army is not a police force and shouldn't be used in that. But where there's a very extreme breakdown in law and order, hopefully will be rare, that may be necessary. But what is a big problem at the moment is, yes, certainly is loss of security. We are a party which is tough and law and order, not in the Fine Gael kind of Maria kind of sense, but we that's why we have to get hold of the immigration, make sure people don't have criminal records. There has to be prisons for people. There must be consequences for people who commit crimes, that they have to be put in the slammer for the protection of society. Now, I do have a problem. I don't know how to deal with it, but judges like Martin Nolan, all these suspended sentences, weak sentences for heinous crimes, I believe is terrible. But there must, in regards, look what has happened over the last number of weeks, where you have had a number of children, attempted abductions of children in streets in Ireland. Like, that cannot continue. Ireland needs a proper functioning justice system, prison service, and there must be consequences for criminals for any harm done on children or old people or just peaceful Irish citizens.
All right, last question, because I think this is important. Obviously, you guys, like a lot of sort of the newer parties have been running, that are running candidates, have made free speech and hate speech a huge issue. So I have two questions, right? The first one is obviously, what can you do as an MEP at European level? Because I think a lot of Gript readers and listeners are interested in this question to protect free speech. But number two, on the flip side, Herman, I want you to answer this one first. Is there anything that an Irish person could say in public that you think it should be illegal for them to say? Anything?
I'll do question 1 and 2. So in regards to free speech, I believe that we, as a party, have led the opposition to free speech. We called for and we held rallies in favour of free speech. I believe it was in December 2019 was the first one. We had 3 rallies in favour of free speech. So we called people out in the street to outside the Dáil to protest the imposition. Now, that legislation, people should be aware, and it says so in the legislation, Article 2, actually comes from EU framework. So that is the transposition into Irish law of what the basic ideas come from an EU framework. So obviously, MEPs voted on this issue before. I think it was 2015 framework, actually. So as an MEP, I would have been voting against this framework. I don't believe it's for the EU to decide, people in Brussels to decide what Irish people can say or cannot say. I believe it's for the Dáil to legislate, the Dáil alone to legislate, and not just simply impose laws from someone else in Brussels. On the second point, is there something that people shouldn't be able to say? And actually, on the whole thing, we've led the debate on, I believe, on immigration, on free speech, on opposition to the trans ideology and standing up for parental rights and education. But in your specific question, is there things that people... Yeah, look, at the moment, we have libel laws that you cannot defame people. We have laws against incitement to violence. So things like that, yeah, incitement to violence. If people are going around advocating violence against individuals, I believe, yeah, that shouldn't... it's not the same as committing violence itself, but advocating killing, genocide, stuff like that, murder, etc. Yeah, I believe there should be consequences for advocating that. And just as there is in civil courts as well, about this, everybody has free speech, but everybody has to bear the consequences of free speech. So for defamation, if you're willing to lie and try to destroy someone's character, there should be consequences for that, either in the criminal law or in the civil law.
Okay, all right. I'll leave it with just one last question. I'm only asking this because I remember I asked Patrick Tobin this question, and in fairness, it is an issue for I don't know how big the portion of the electorate is, but it's a portion of the electorate. The Irish government is proposing to recognise Palestine as a state. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
And as an individual and as a party, we don't take any view on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Our priority is Ireland and the Irish people, and we just look. You see Mary Lou McDonald and all those on the left with Palestine flags in their bio. It's all about Hamas and Palestine. Look, we don't get involved and we're not. No Irish person is going to be able to solve that conflict. We stay out of it, and we take a neutral position on the whole Israel-Palestine conflict.
All right, ourselves alone, you might say. All right, Hermann Kelly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I said the same thing to Patrick Tobin, and I'll say to you, regardless of whether you agreed with Hermann or you didn't agree with him, he's putting his name forward, he's putting his views forward. I think it's fair to say that some of Hermann's views are not in alignment with the sort of political establishment in Ireland. He's going out there in an election. He's putting them before the people, and he's asking you to give your views on them, which is a brave thing for anybody to do. It takes courage, it takes time, and it takes money. So as a citizen, I thank you for that, as I would anybody. And as a journalist, I thank you very much for joining us this evening for this conversation. So that was Hermann Kelly. I'm not entirely sure who the next person is. I suspect it'll be another candidate, though, in Midlands Northwest. And then after that, hopefully, we'll get to one of the other constituencies. I've been John McGuirk. This has been Gript Media. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, you can vote on June the 7th this year in the local and European elections. Anybody over the age of 18 can vote, and we will talk before those elections get around about how best it is to use your vote and how far down the ballot paper you should go, ideally, because loads of people are talking about that. But until next time, thanks very much, Hermann. Thanks very much for listening, and we will see you again.